If you actually want to grow your podcast, growing on YouTube is a necessity at this point. People fought it for as long as they could, but at this point, everyone's realizing if you don't grow on YouTube, you really can't grow a podcast. It is the single best source of organic growth. And so if you understand how to do YouTube, you can grow a podcast way faster than your competition because almost every podcast out there truly sucks at YouTube. And so in this series of videos, I'm going to teach you all the different things that go into creating a great podcast strategy specific for YouTube. Because myself, I run a YouTube agency that specializes in helping podcasters grow. We've helped some of the largest podcasters on the planet grow on YouTube specifically. So I know how important this stuff is and how well it can work if you know what you're doing. So for the first video in this series, I'm going to teach you how to specifically write titles for your podcast content. And I can't stress how important this is and how you're doing a few things wrong that is making a massive difference in terms of how much performance you could be getting. So stick around for this entire video if you care about your show. Take notes throughout it. I'm not going to have any crazy edits throughout this video because I want it to be raw and authentic and give you everything that I do as I'm working with my agency, having these massive shows paying us to help them grow. So let's start off with what you're probably doing wrong. I see these mistakes all the time from podcasters because they just don't get how YouTube works. Luckily, I've been growing YouTube channels for 7 or 8 years at this point. I've grown my own YouTube channel to over 100,000 subscribers. Can't see the plaque, but it's over there. And so this is all I do every single day. I'm a massive nerd with this stuff. And we help podcasters specifically because there's crazy results you can get from a podcast if you figure this stuff out. Because the podcast solves most of the content problem where you can consistently get a lot of high quality content consistently. But packaging it the right way is critical because you're competing against other YouTube videos. You're competing against people's favorite sports team, their deepest interest, the most attractive people on the planet, all these different things. You're competing against them. And so even if your content is the best of the best, if it's not packaged well relative to what you're competing against, you won't stand a chance. But when you figure this stuff out, you can have massive changes in your growth. So for titles specifically, one of the biggest mistakes that I see is front loading the wrong things. So a lot of people in podcasting, they have either like the name of their guest and then also the episode number or the name of their show, all these different things that is completely wasted real estate. When it comes to YouTube titles, you want to prioritize the first 60 characters with everything that's important to get the people to click. A lot of people think that because Joe Rogan titles his stuff really simply that they should copy him, or other podcasts that have been using these outdated formats that they should also copy them, but it's not helping you whatsoever. If you want to grow your show, you have to think about the viewer you're trying to attract. And so if you put any sort of irrelevant information or things that don't enhance the chances of you getting the click, it is completely wasted space. And if you're trying to grow your show, you can't afford to waste space. People are skimming through things on YouTube. And like I said, you're competing against their favorite things on the planet. So if you don't front load the most important things, one, it might not be seen, or two, it might not even get read, right? Because people scan and they make very quick snap-second decisions for whether to read more or not. And so if you're putting in the front of this most valuable real estate you have, if you're putting like an episode number and the guest's name who isn't famous, or the name of your show, which is just a total waste of space, you are absolutely ruining your chances of getting a high click-through rate and growing your show. So what you should do instead is completely prioritize the things that can get you the views. All right. And there's a pretty standard format for this, which we'll go in and I'll explain this. So there's a few shows that I want to highlight to show you this. So we'll start
before we start this pod,
The Diary of a CEO, because I'm sure it's a show that you're aware of. And they've really pioneered this format from being the show that got the most success with it. But we've been doing this stuff for years. They just are the ones that made it the most popular. So you'll see they're constantly being conscious of the beginning of their titles. And this is one of the biggest shows on the planet. Do you see any of this wasted real estate, right? Do you see anything that's irrelevant? You don't see the episode number. You don't see the name of the show. They're very deliberate about front loading the important things, the click triggers, the things that make people care. You have to front load that. And they also use a very proven format again and again and again. It's what we use with our clients typically. All this stuff comes with nuance, which is why we have an agency, is because you need enough data points to make the right decision. But just following what I do in this video will improve your performance so much. Just the principles that I'm going to share with you. So if you look at them, they're all following a very similar format. So let me give you 2 examples here. So the chronic disease expert. So at the beginning of the title, they're setting relevance and intrigue. So why should you care about this person's perspective? what is the social proof for this person's opinion having any sort of merit? Or why should you care? Essentially, that's it. Like, why should you care about this person, right? And then it comes down to the topic of interest. The biggest point that this person is qualified or interesting to hear their opinions on that subject. And you'll see it again and again, right? So he makes the choice here, and they split test things all the time. They're a great study, a case study to learn from, but they constantly experiment with different formats. So if the guest is not very famous or the name's not well known, this guy's quite famous, but his name is not well known. I've seen him all over the internet, but I don't know his name. And so for that situation, you want to broaden the scope of intrigue for the beginning part of a title. You want it to be the most universally understandable and interesting. So for example, like if I were to try to give this girl a specific title, I probably would be far too broad, and that would limit the amount of people that could potentially be interested. And so your job as a creator on YouTube or a podcaster on YouTube is to maximize the potential viewership of every single piece of content. And so that's not to say that you should be so broad that it attracts nobody, but it needs to attract everybody that could be interested, right? A lot of the times people go far too specific with their content, and it just limits the reach, because YouTube ultimately just wants people to click and then watch. But if you shrink how many people can click, you're not going to get the first part. You're not going to put the gas in the car, so obviously it's not going to go anywhere. And so I've only learned this because I've been making YouTube content for literally a decade at this point. And so let me give you an example on my own channel that will show you a lot of specifics on what I'm talking about here. So if you go to my channel right here, I used to make content all about helping people grow on social media, right? And so if you look at this for an example from my show, is when I made videos covering very broad and interesting topics, naturally there was more potential viewership. But if I go more specific on something like right here, how to create the perfect Instagram bio. This was probably one of the best videos I've ever posted and the most valuable, but it only got 49,000 views. Why is that? That's because for me to attract people to this video, I'm assuming so much prior context, right? Because for someone to care about this video, they have to want to grow on Instagram, they have to know a decent amount of on Instagram, and they have to know that having a perfect Instagram bio is worth their time. That's a lot to assume, right? So naturally, if you think about the Venn diagram of potential interest, there's Instagram growth, and then now I'm adding more and more circles to the Venn diagram, which is going to shrink the potential audience size. So that's why you want to broaden the scope as much as possible with your title while still remaining true to your audience. So an example of how I could have made this far more of a broad appeal would have been making it more specific about the desired outcome that I know anybody on Instagram wants. So it could be the secret. This is top of head. The secret growth formula that only the biggest accounts know, right? Do you see the difference in terms of how many viewers that could have appealed to? So that's why if you're trying to reach a mass audience, you need to maximize the potential viewership. So hopefully that example makes sense. But one caveat here, and that's why there's so much nuance in growing a podcast, which is why I love it, but why it makes it difficult, is this still may make sense if this keyword for me was very important. So what I'm talking about here, when we're going to go through this, is the advice that I'm going to give when I'm referring to these two examples is when you're trying to win on browse and suggested. So being shown to a cold audience, either on the homepage of YouTube or in the suggestion bar when you click a video and it pops up on the side, that's attracting a cold audience. And so the approach to that is different than the approach to search. And if you didn't know that, you have a lot more to learn about YouTube. Okay. And we help you with that on this channel here. And I'm also thinking about making a private coaching community specifically for podcasters to help them grow, scale, and monetize, because that's what we've been doing with my agency for years. And I would love to offer a more affordable price point to help you guys achieve your goals. But that's a very important caveat, is that this is not necessarily a bad idea if this keyword is very important for me, right? If I know that me ranking number 1 for how to create an Instagram bio is really important for my business, then that's okay to structure a title that is more specific, but only if it's aligned with your specific goals. So what I recommend for you is, if you've never done keyword research before, what I want you to do is go through and find all the keywords that if someone typed that into Google or YouTube, they'd be really happy that they found your show, and then go make content that would be specific to the intent behind the search. So that's a topic for another video. We'll get to that in another video. If you want that specifically, let me know in the comments and I'll make that in the future. That'll probably be the last video in this series. But let's get back to titling in particular. So let's go back for this. Now we're going back to broadest potential reach. So you set the context by making it as universally interesting and as easy to understand as possible, right? The chronic disease expert. Anybody who understands English for the most part can understand that concept. If he had have gone something more specific, or like let's say talked about a specific illness, that's another circle in the Venn diagram. So he purposely makes this as broad as he can while not alienating the intended audience. And that's really a skill. It comes with a lot of practice and studying successful shows, which is what we do every single day. And we run some of the largest shows on the planet. So we do this all the time. And it really, really matters. So then when you set the context, you then want to build an intrigue point. So what is the strongest click trigger that this person, this easy to understand and universally interesting person with their specific expertise, what did we talk about in the episode that you know would capture the largest audience? And it's usually one of two things that you want to think about here. Is what are the biggest element that either brings someone towards their desired outcome, so towards pleasure, or away from pain? And as human beings, we are survival machines. So away from pain almost always works better. And so if you go and look at almost all of his videos, it's away from pain. They're poking at people's insecurities, fears, worries, etc., because it works. It's strong and it's effective. You can try both, but honestly, people are far more motivated by the fear of loss than they are the potential of gain. But your second part of your title, after you've set the context, should always be one of those two things. Because naturally, let's just think for a second about why anyone is watching any content, and especially why do people come to podcasts in particular? It's because they have a specific problem they're looking for a solution for. And they go to a podcast because they want that extra depth that you just can't get with short form content or even shorter videos on YouTube. And so the better that you understand this, the more that you're showing them that you understand what they're going through, which dramatically increases the chances that they click. And because they're going to be emotionally invested, because you understood what was going on in their brain, what they're thinking about, what they're worried about, the chances of them sticking around goes up exponentially. So that's why if you understand all this stuff, growing a podcast can become so much easier once you understand YouTube. The problem why most people are frustrated with their podcast and their growth is because they don't get YouTube. And YouTube is the biggest tool for organic podcast discovery. Spotify's trying to get better. It's certainly not there. And where else do people grow a podcast? They really don't. And there's a lot of people out there who are saying, oh, you don't need to have your podcast on YouTube. They're saying that because they don't understand YouTube. Because if they understood this stuff, it would be such an obviously glaring need. And they're only not saying you need to be there because they can't sell you the solution to be there. So they're saying, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to be there, which is just a really bad idea. Because even if a show can work with audio, it would work way better with video on YouTube. Okay. And if this really comes down to a 3-part triangle here. Okay. So it's idea or concept, title, and thumbnail. That's really the triangle that of YouTube success. And so throughout this series, I'm going to teach you all of those different things, but that's it in a nutshell. So if you're looking for a formula you want to practice and get better at is setting context for the individual. How can I frame this person and their expertise in the most universally interesting and understandable way? I want to keep that Venn diagram or that potential viewer pool as large as possible while still being specific enough to attract the people I know want to watch this show. And you as the expert in this field should have a pretty good idea of how to do this. And the Diary of a CEO is a fantastic resource to learn from in particular, okay? There are exceptions to this, like everything. If your guest is incredibly famous and they are the click trigger, then of course front load that because that is the draw to the show. But if you look through this, almost all of them, they're setting the context in something that they know people can understand because they don't know the individual, but they understand the individual's significance. And that's really the skill of writing a title for YouTube for a podcast, right? So if you go look at all of these, body language expert, right? Easier to understand than a lot of other concepts. Corrupt cop, Peter Attia, because they've deemed that Peter is well known enough on YouTube to warrant his name being front loaded. So the formula is frame the person or the guest. If it's a solo episode, then you don't really need to frame the person as much, more so focus on the second part, which is the most universally interesting topic of conversation from that episode, right? So on any given episode, chances are you're talking about 4 to 5, potentially even more things. You can try to include multiple things in the titles and thumbnails, and Prof G does this pretty well. But that can also get overwhelming for people. So There are multiple ways to go around things. So he does this quite often with this right here, right? This right here. Elon, so he includes multiple topics in one show, but that can be kind of difficult if they're not related, right? Because when you don't have the influence of Prof G, if you try to make your episode about 3 things, the chances of people caring goes down pretty dramatically, right? So I recommend doing what Diary of a CEO does and framing it around one specific, the most universally interesting topic that you possibly can. The thing that you have going for you on YouTube is that, this is a direct quote from the former head of product at YouTube. They said, "We don't give up on YouTube videos, so neither should you." A massive part of our agency is split testing different things. So if a title doesn't work right away, go in and change it. You can constantly try different combinations. Maybe you didn't crack the understandability, I don't know if that's a word, of the framing, right? Maybe you went too specific. You can go in and change that. And you can do this until you reach the right combo. And I have done this so many times, thousands of times, where we've seen title changes, the slightest of tweaks, result in massive inflection points where it gets to far more people. So that's it. I'll give you one more example from Danny Jones. So Danny Jones is a guy who covers pretty esoteric subjects. He covers like aliens, conspiracy theories, all that good stuff, all that tinfoil hat stuff that I love. So with this though, almost no one he's gonna have on is famous, right? They might be niche famous in terms of people who really like this kind of content, but they're not famous for YouTube. And like I said before, we want to have this potential viewership as large as possible. So what Danny does a really good job of, again, is framing the intrigue of the person, right? So let's go to some of his most popular episodes, and I'll try to find someone of non-famous people. So like he's pretty famous, Matthew Cox. But let me give you some lessons here from looking at his, right? So Stephen Greer is one of the most famous UFO people in the world. And so he was cool with leading with his face and then leading with the intrigue within the title, right? So he was able to do that. Whereas if someone is less famous, like let's go with here, ancient language expert, right? He framed that in the beginning. So it's totally specific to who you're having on. If you're watching this episode, chances are your guests won't be as famous as, say, Stephen Greer within your target community. So you're going to want to get good at this. Framing the unique value of your guest in the beginning to then talk about the major click trigger from the conversation covered. And again, if this is solo episodes, then you just focus on the second part of this. What is the most interesting part of this episode that would make people click? Okay, so we're going to keep focusing on browse and suggested based titles. In a future video, I'll tell you how to target keywords and all that good stuff. But that's this in a nutshell. And I can't stress to you how much this stuff really matters. If you go compare the best shows and then go look at your show or competitor shows, they don't understand how to write titles for YouTube. You are trying to captivate a cold audience. And so if you don't position enough value or understanding of their situation, what their goals and their dreams are, or what their fears and their worries are, you can't expect people to click. So this is really it in a nutshell. It's a proven formula that goes around and around and it works again and again. And if you want help with this, as I said, I've been running my agency for 5 years, but we recently launched a new tool called Podcast Packaging, where you can work directly with my team at a far lower price point than working with us directly as an agency to get your podcast titles and thumbnails. So if you need help with your thumbnails, if this sounded way too much for you, that's why we built this service. We've helped some of the largest shows in the world. And what we do is we specialize in packaging for your content. So you can come in, you can hand this service off to us, and we'll handle your titles and thumbnails to improve the amount of people that are seeing and clicking your content. So we offer either monthly plans or pay as you go, depending on how you want to go. We operate on a credit-based system. And also, this is a big thing that we've had so many requests for. And every time we get a new client in with the agency, we start here. So a lot of people, they really don't like their thumbnails and they try to build off of a poor foundation. Whereas whenever we get a new client, we go down to grassroots and try to build a foundation around approach to design that is YouTube forward and also related to the brand. We want to make sure that we're hitting all of our touch points the most effective way possible. So we build out a full comprehensive brand guide, including fonts, logos, approach to design, edits, all these different things. So that's an option here. If you already like your approach to design, you can also just go with either of these and we can just recreate and improve your existing format a little bit. But a lot of people that I come across, They don't have this stuff sorted out. So we do have this as an offering as well. This is linked down below. Go ahead and check it out, podcastpackaging.com. And make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're trying to grow your podcast. The next video will be all about thumbnails. So I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching. Peace.